So Mike Willemin is to my right, and John Elefterakis is to my left. They are with two different law firms, but together they are co-representing Brian Flores in his case against the Giants, his case against the Broncos, and, of course, the class action suit against the NFL. So I appreciate you guys coming in. Make sure the mics are up, fellas, please. It's good to meet both of you. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I guess, John, I'll just start with you. First off, just so I know from my background, what's your guys' connection prior to this to Brian? Or did he yellow page, white page, let me find a couple reputable law firms?
So my firm, myself, I have a long-standing relationship with Coach Flores, with Brian.
Okay.
We went to school together at Brooklyn's Poly Prep.
Poly Prep guys?
Yeah,
All right.
He's a little older than me, but, we have a real tight-knit group from Poly Prep that we're like brothers. So, I have my firm, Elefterakis and Panek, downtown Manhattan. We have about 40 lawyers. And we all follow each other's careers. And, Brian reached out to me when he got the text message.
So that's where it starts. The Belichick text message. Now, I can just move your mic down so I can put it right
But did he, as a pal of his, had he ever talked to you about, different job interviews he'd gone on, his experience as a candidate for a head coaching job?
No, not really professionally like that. Friends, admiration, see each other, go down to games. A lot of respect. My firm, we do a lot of, civil rights work on top of injury work. So, we brought the national class action against Macy's, where Rob Brown was discriminated against, and he's also a classmate of Oz, so he was reaching out at that time in some other cases.
So I want to do this as best we can chronologically so people understand kind of the cases you guys see it. And there are times, I'll argue with you to play devil's advocate because I do think there is another side of it, of course. The Giants are going to have a side. The NFL is going to have a side. So for the sake of presenting this as fairly as possible, just please understand that going into it. So it begins for you guys and for Brian where he believes at first that he's going to have a legitimate shot at the New York Giant head coaching job prior to the Belichick text message. Was there any conversations that he's made you guys aware of in which he talked directly to either John Mara, Steve Tisch, or Chris Mara, who are usually the three men in the room when they interview prospective coaches?
So let me just say this, Craig. This has started before the text messages and the conversations. I mean, you look at the complaint, the stuff that was alleged against Denver and his issues in Miami all started before. But him coming to the realization that he's got to stand up and do something, that started when the text message came. But, he was, and you could see in the complaint, he was communicating with John Mara, who reached out and told him, you are, the number one candidate. We'd love to bring you home.
So John Mara called him?
Yes, about 30 minutes after Joe Judge got fired.
So Judge gets fired, Mara reaches out, Brian, you're my guy.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much.
And then, just out of curiosity, why wasn't, as far as you know, an interview scheduled right away at that point? Why did we wait so much time before they actually interviewed him?
I don't know why. Usually that's the team's scheduling.
Okay.
I know that they wanted to obviously do and conduct their GM search first, which took up a lot of time. And the interview really didn't come that long after Shane got hired.
The job.
So he gets hired. Obviously, they interviewed Daboll, I think, virtually
Saturday.
Zoom one
it was like
prior to the
few
Bills
days
Chiefs
before
game.
that week.
All right. So John Mara personally reaches out to Brian and says, "You're my number one guy. Want to bring you home."
Yes.
That type of stuff.
Essentially, yeah.
All right.
When Joe Shane gets hired, did his view of the job go from, well, maybe they're not going to hire me because he knows, Dable will work with Joe Shane. Did that change how he thought this would go?
I mean, there are no guarantees. I don't think Brian would ever express, and obviously I can't get into his mind, and he hasn't expressed it to me, but I don't think there was an expectation that there was a guarantee. That's not what he's saying.
Right.
Okay.
It's not what the lawsuit's about. But a fair and equal process. How do you go from, the lead guy, the number one guy, top candidate, to a job being offered to somebody else before you even step in the building for an interview? I mean,
what is he? So he gets the text message from Belichick. Mike, I'll let you jump in on this. And I assume it blows his world up because it's very obvious that Belichick thinks he's talking to Brian Daboll and not Brian Flores, right?
That's correct. And that was certainly something for him that at first he thought Belichick might have had information that would have suggested that Mr. Flores was going to get the job, right? And then it dawned upon him after Mr. Belichick Bill Belichick talks about speaking with the Bills and the Giants. Maybe this guy doesn't know who he's talking to.
Right.
And so that's why you see a little bit later that text message, are you talking to Brian Dable or are you talking to Brian Flores? And then, of course, the Belichick text message saying
up.
back.
Was there ever a thought, and I loved his answer this morning because I would think the exact same way of, I can get this job anyway, even if they've already decided on someone else. Was there ever a thought of not going on the interview?
There was a thought, absolutely.
Did you advise him to do it?
We talked it out. There's a lot of different different factors at play. First of all, he's just the type of guy who's always gonna push forward.
Right.
And he's a focused guy, cerebral guy. So he wanted to go put his best foot forward anyway. And there's, like he said, and he said it all day, a sliver of hope. But on the other side of it, as a black coach, I mean, look at how the Dolphins have defamed him and flipped everything around. And made him out to be, this is a guy who's difficult to work with. This is essentially an angry black man situation. I mean, that's what it is. Call it what it is.
I don't agree with that part. They muddied the waters for him. I
wouldn't call him that either. But essentially, what are they saying?
Well, and also
they're
an organization that never had back-to-back winning seasons in 18 years. Brian Flores was the coach that made that happen.
Brian Flores in 2020 was considered for Coach of the Year. 2021, I mean, he rallied a group from 1-7 to win 7 straight and 8 out of the last 9, sweeping the Patriots.
All right, let me get back. I want to get back to just the case and the specific case against the Giants first, and then the larger case was important. We'll get to that as well. So you guys did have a conversation that, hey, I have too much pride, whatever the case may be. I'm not going to that interview. I know they've already hired Brian Dable. Too much self-respect. I'm not going to do it. During the interview, because it's not a 20-minute interview, are you aware at any point him saying to the Giants hierarchy or brass, hey, rumor has it that you've already agreed on Dable. Have you done that? Did he call them on it?
No, he didn't, and he wasn't going in there to challenge them in that way. He was going in there to conduct the interview as it would be conducted if it wasn't a sham.
And does he feel as if it was that the interview was straight? Like, did the Giants treat him in the manner he expected to be? The questions they would normally ask. He's been on, I think, 9 interviews, right?
I don't think I don't have his exact response in this. So, but from just playing it out, I don't think it was the way it went in Denver with respect to how they came in disheveled and effectively smelling of reeking of alcohol.
Right.
But,
so he feels like the Giants actually, whether or not they had an agreement with Dable, the Giants didn't totally disrespect him by going through a BS interview.
Well, wait a second. Let's not dress it up. It was they humiliated him. So I don't know whether you're telling me they're good actors or they dedicated 8 hours to pretending that they were going to do him a favor and not just go in there drunk. Yeah, I guess if that's what you call.
Well, that's what I'm asking. I'm saying, like, the actual interview he did. We can all agree that
I wasn't there, but I can't agree with just because they went in there and asked him a few legitimate questions that they were showing him any respect or anything that resembles the approach that and the consideration that would rise to the level of having an equal opportunity.
But he did not feel the same way he felt about the Denver experience. That's fair.
It was not the same experience.
I got it.
They came at him a different way, but no matter how you slice it, it was humiliating there. It was humiliating with the Giants.
What do you need to because the Belichick text messages you said changed everything. What do you need to show to prove that they truly did make that decision before ever interviewing him?
Well, ultimately, we're going to end up in litigation in this case, right? And we're going to be seeking documents, text messages, instant messages, and all sorts of communications. And it's clear that these individuals communicate via text message, and I suspect that we're going to find a lot more evidence of this decision. But it's already been reported by other sources as well. There was Jimmy Randazzo that came out and said that this decision had been made on Monday, the week that Mr. Flores interviewed, just a few days after that.
Right.
And then Boomer Esiason.
We talked about it.
Oh, no, we heard that.
Well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think this was any sort of secret, which in a lot of ways makes the situation, makes it an absolutely terrible situation, even all the more worse, because it's behind the scenes, people knowing, but not him.
Right, but my question is, do you have to have contact between the agent and the Giants negotiating a deal, or is it just,
No.
hey, we've made the decision
No.
or we're leaning away?
No, I mean, if their mind was made up, I think it was clear. It's definitive
Right.
proof from the text message. I think the text message is all we need. But like you said, other people were breaking it. And, we will continue to question people in the course of discovery. We'll depose Bill Belichick. But let's ask the bigger question. Why does Bill Belichick have this information?
That's a great.
Like, what are we
I'll tell you
talking
the-
about?
We all know the answer
Why?
to that.
Why does
we know,
Bill have the
Because
attention?
we no longer live in a society where people keep their lips tight. People like sharing information.
But why do you have
because
to
it makes
tell
them
Bill
feel
Belichick?
good. Because that's what he's the grand.
So let me ask you,
do.
but let me ask you a question. When can a black
I'm not
coach?
saying it's right,
But wait a
that's what they
second. No,
do.
I'm not saying you're saying it's right. But when can a black coach or a black executive get in that club? When can they get in the club of having information before it breaks? When can they have information and influence to get a job? Or even interview for it.
What is the thought process that of all the African American or minority candidates who we all would agree are deserving of a head coaching position that haven't gotten one? Brian at least got one. He got a 5-year contract for guaranteed money. This has nothing to do with this particular case against the Giants. That maybe he's not the right guy to bring this case. After all, he did get an opportunity. What do you say to that?
What I say to that is that's ridiculous. The fact that he had a job before means that you can't be discriminated against, or
Not saying that.
so the fact that, first of all, we didn't even talk about what went down in Miami, but what effectively we're saying is that he doesn't even have to be afforded an opportunity to interview. What we're talking about is equal opportunity in hiring and firing practices.
Right.
You can't have separate practices for white coaches and
Of course
minority
not, of
coaches.
course not.
So when are white coaches not afforded an opportunity to be hired? I mean, we have one black coach in the entire
Which is
league.
obnoxiously wrong.
But these are things that need to be the focus. Everybody, when these situations break, routinely try to find an argument or something to hang their hat on. We have people who just try to get behind a position because they can relate to an organization. Eli Manning, I just saw a statement where he comes out and he co-signs the Giants without being involved in the process and knowing nothing.
Well, how would he possibly do that?
Why would you issue a
He
statement?
shouldn't have said
Can
anything.
you guys grab me the Eli Manning
Yeah, he
statement?
basically said, "I know the Giants didn't do anything wrong, but I wasn't in the room."
point is,
So how do
as,
you know?
as a society, let's
stupid.
support what's right and proper, and let's get against what shouldn't happen.
Well, here's the thing. I think we can all agree on this, and this is my take. I'm sure I could be wrong. The New York Giants agreed that Brian Daboll was going to be their head coach 3 days before Brian Flores walked into their offices. I don't think that's really up for debate.
No doubt.
So let me ask you this. So,
I just
so
don't.
would you agree that
I think that happened.
Agreed. It did happen.
Yeah.
But let's talk about this. What about the fact that there is a rule, the Rooney Rule, which
Yeah.
which doesn't work, admittedly.
Clearly.
3 black coaches when it was enacted, and now there's 1. So the Rooney Rule doesn't work. Obviously good intentions. But what do you say to the fact that they had not even complied with the Rooney Rule before?
Yeah, I think, listen, obviously it's a problem. I'm sure they're not the only team that tries to skirt it. And whether you fine them or take draft picks away, it ultimately doesn't change it, because if it had, there'd be more than one black coach in the NFL.
So
when Brian first came to you, here's a guy who's a very proud man, literally came from nothing in Brownsville, Brooklyn. I saw the video that, of all people, the Dolphins put out a number of years ago when he was first hired. And his story it's the great American success story. Literally, his mom wouldn't let him leave their small apartment in Brownsville to play because she feared for his life as a young boy.
They say a rose grew from the concrete.
Right. I mean, the video is worth seeing. I was very moved by it. And I have great respect for his story. Making a decision to sue the NFL, to sue the Giants, the Broncos, etc., to me is also career suicide. And I wonder,
It may be.
I know the Texans think very highly of him. I think it'd be hard for the Texans to hire him today. But that being said, did you guys, especially since you're friends with him for a long time, did you guys have a lengthy conversation about, hey, we're going to go do this, but let's just understand the shrapnel to your career?
I mean, Brian is a cerebral guy. Brian thinks everything through. We absolutely spoke about it. And he knew that in doing this, he may be sacrificing his entire career for a greater good, which, I don't know who can't get behind someone who can,
No, I
do that.
personally have great respect for it. I'm just wondering how much you guys went back and forth, not just as his lawyers, But as a friend,
Yeah, I mean,
hey, listen, just understand what you're getting into.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this is heavy. I mean, look at just what broke today. I mean, it gets lost on people that this man is not just a this man is not just a robot. I mean, he has a wife. He's got 3 little kids who watch TV, watch the news. We were in the green room at CBS this morning, and he's on a call with his daughter, and she says, "Daddy, did you get a job yet?" I mean, that's the type of stuff that when we sit here and we see this on TV and people try to get behind something, they miss the fact that his wife has to read negative things.
Is he still, because, I mean, maybe I'm being naive here. I would hire him in a second. He's a hell of a head coach. Is he still in line to interview with the Saints again, with the Texans?
No, he interviewed. The interviews are done. They went very well.
And what now?
He had a great rapport with Mickey Loomis in New Orleans.
Right.
He had a great interview with Nick Casario.
What have they said since?
Since they're, obviously Brian alerted them before filing, obviously
So
respectfully.
he made both their teams aware. Listen, I'm filing a suit.
Yes.
You just got to know.
And
about
he
it.
said, I still want to be considered.
Right.
I could still lead your football
Wait, so
team.
he went for the interviews prior to informing them of the lawsuit.
Yes.
How have they responded since to then?
I don't believe New Orleans responded. I think he's had a subsequent conversation with Houston, but nothing about the lawsuit.
Well,
is it your impression that they're not going to hire him?
I can't make that determination. I mean, that's for them internally to discuss. I mean, listen, one thing I know about Brian wants to work again, even though he understands the risk. He wants to work, but the reality is he's going to be happier to know that whoever gives him a shot, obviously their values are in line with who he is and support what he did to champion a cause, not just for himself, but for an entire, race.
I can tell you who's not getting the Houston Texan job. Josh McCown's got no shot at it now.
Well,
how pathetic would that be?
They
can't.
Listen, let's just talk about how ridiculous. David Culley gets fired, and Josh McCown, he could be a great quarterback. The guy's coaching high school football.
It's a joke.
So now you potentially hire Josh McCown over Brian Flores.
Pardon me for a second. I apologize. They brought me the Eli Manning quote. This is comical. This is, and Eli, you should know, is still a paid consultant for the New York Giants, of course.
Oh, wow.
So Eli Manning says this: "I was not involved in any of that process in any way, so I don't know the details. But I don't think there was any wrong."
You're right. I mean, come on, then keep your mouth shut.
What are you talking about? But that's what we do in society. People co-sign things with people are parroting Brian is difficult to work with no investigation, no.
Well, he and Chris Greer didn't get along. That's well known.
Chris Greer is also a terrible general manager.
I'm saying that's not a one-way street. They didn't like each other.
I know,
but how does that make Brian difficult to work with?
No, the problem is, as a football fan, I know the Dolphins suck.
Yeah.
And I know that their GM's done a terrible job, and I know that owner's been incompetent. And I know as a Jet fan, I don't like the Dolphins, that they've been good the last 2 years. I know that.
We're talking
I
to
know he's a good head coach.
John Elefterakis and Mike Willemin. They're the lawyers that represent Brian Flores. Go ahead.
I apologize.
No worries.
Are there other... Because Brian, for him to do this, is obviously very brave, as we've talked about. Are there other coaching candidates that are going to join in and say, I dealt with sham interviews, I dealt with this, I'm joining in? Do you have others ready to join?
We certainly expect so. We've been in contact with a lot of coaches, a lot of people that were candidates for jobs that they didn't get, whether from a coaching level, executive level, down to front office and the NFL level. I mean, we've received a lot of calls in the last number of days, in the last 24 hours.
Sure.
Brian's obviously connected with a lot of people who have experienced similar things. And when you look at what has happened in the last 24 hours, which I think is almost as interesting as the suit itself, you've got virtually every black former player, executive coach, et cetera, coming out acknowledging that this exists.
Right.
And then you've got the NFL that on a 60-page complaint with hundreds and hundreds of allegations comes out in an hour and says the whole thing is meritless.
I was going to ask you about that. What was? I mean, we laughed at that saying. I mean, it's so flippant to do that. I assume you guys thought that was crazy.
Well, what's amazing is that the NFL has repeatedly acknowledged when it behooves them that they do have a problem. I mean, the Rooney Rule came out of at least a purported recognition of a problem.
Right.
You've got Troy Vincent. Who's an executive at the NFL, saying that black coaches are subjected to a double standard. And you've got the chief diversity officer at the NFL saying that This is a problem that is our responsibility and our fault. And the first time, within moments of being called out by a specific person on a specific set of events and having their whole history laid out in front of them, without any introspection, thought, investigation, or consideration whatsoever, they say it's completely meritless. I mean, that is just
That's
unbelievable.
the NFL. It's the hubris of the NFL, which is why I don't think you're going to depose a single person or see the inside of a courtroom on this at all. At some point, when it gets ugly enough for them, they're going to call you up and say, all right, what's it going to take? How big a check am I writing?
Well, I can tell you that. I can
you.
tell you. Sorry, just real quick. It's not going to be just a check that resolves this case, and that's really important because and I think this gets back to your question: why is Mr. Flores the right guy? Why is Brian the right guy? It's because he was willing to do this. He could have gotten a check. He could have gotten a check from whether he got an assistant coach job, whether he could have kept himself in candidacy for some of these other jobs. He was not going to not work again. He's 40 years old. This is someone who is willing to step up and say, I'm going to forego that check or at least risk that in order to make change. And he said all morning, and he said to us the last number of days in deciding this, that the NFL is at a crossroads. There's a fork in the road here. And in order to resolve this case, in order to avoid those depositions and that discovery and that trial, they're going to need to commit to real, meaningful change. And it starts with the ownership.
If the Giants came out and said, you know what, we messed up. We messed up. We had great respect for Brian. He was a legitimate candidate. John Mayer, as you said, reached out to him a half hour after Joe Judge got fired and said, want to bring you back home. You're my number one guy. If the Giants came out and said, you know what, in retrospect, we goofed here. We're happy with Daboll, but we didn't do it the right way, and we're sorry about that. Would he drop the suit against them?
Never. This is bigger than one situation, and there's going to be more people in this class, as we just talked about. I mean, we're talking to coaches. It's not going to happen. There needs to be real change now. The time is now. I mean, this is a moment, and I think he understood that with the risk, that this is a moment that we're looking for real change. He's looking for real change.
Right.
So it's not just going to be, hey, I'm sorry, let's spray some Febreze on the stink and move on. Not happening.
Well, one of the other big accusations is Stephen Ross offering him money to lose games.
Can we time out? Do you guys have a minute so we can take a quick break? And
Let's do it.
Is that cool?
Let's do it.
All right, we'll take a very quick break. On the other side of the break, we'll continue on with Mike Willemin and Jeff Elefterakis. They are the lawyers representing Brian Flores. Did I mess the name up?
John Elefterakis.
What did I say?
Jeez, man.
What did I call you?
Look at this.
What did I call you?
Jeff. All of a sudden, I
Jeff.
became Jeff. I disagree with you for 2 minutes, and
Well,
I'm Jeff.
now you're Jeff. You got
Come
a
on.
brother?
Nick. I got a brother, Nick, not Jeff.
John Elefterakis, I do apologize for that. Obviously, the other part of the story, which in a lot of ways is even bigger, is the notion that Stephen Ross wanted to fix the outcome of games so that they could maybe get Joe Burrow. So we're going to get into that in depth with these guys in just a moment. All right, welcome back. Carton and Roberts on the Fan. Mike and John, not Jeff. Just want to make sure I get that right.
He's now known as Jeff Forever to his friends.
You guys have killed my day. Someone on the Fan earlier talked about my split lip that I got punched in the lip. Now you're calling me Jeff. I mean, it's just the Fan. You guys really don't like me, man. Jesus Christ.
I wonder if your money's any good at Michael's Ristorante now in Brooklyn. It may not be.
Always good at Michael's.
Okay.
I got to bring you some sauce.
Please do. All right, so Mike and John here, they represent Brian Flores. I think we got into the Giants stuff pretty well.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by this Stephen Ross thing. And the number one thing is, do you guys have proof that Stephen Ross said that to Brian Flores? Hey, I'll give you $100,000. Let's lose some games.
So I'm not going to get into everything that we have and the stuff that we will get. But, this conversation did happen, and Brian's word, who he is, his integrity. I mean, Brian's a no-nonsense, straight shooter. Integrity and character is everything to him. So people's reputations and people coming forward, that's evidence. That's evidence. But there will be more and other people who are involved in this conversation.
So in other words, there'll be other people that can claim to have been in the room when Stephen Ross allegedly said it.
Brian,
is that what we're saying?
Brian informed people when this happened. Say this.
No, I don't mean that. I don't mean like Brian reached out and told friends. Like
no, not friends. Organizational.
Is there a chance that there's a third, fourth, fifth person that would have heard it? That's what I'm asking.
I'm not saying third, fourth, and fifth, but there were other people in the building who knew about it. Absolutely.
And it wasn't like a joke. He was being dead serious. Like, here's the offer, lose some games.
Brian was being. And part of the discord in Miami was after he didn't tank and didn't cooperate. I guess, he's an uncooperative guy, right? So after he doesn't do these things, the next 2 years, it's constantly, if we would have got the number 1 pick, so it's just constantly brought up. But no, this was a serious conversation.
Was it said to him, just timeline-wise, was it done early in the season, late in the season?
I don't know.
And was it said multiple times, or was it a one-time thing?
I don't know.
Okay.
But there was definitely a vibe in the building that upper management was against him as well, to the point where, Brian will tell you he believes it galvanized the team that year. Who did they have?
Right.
And they were winning games.
There was one of the stories I was told over this past year, I'm not sure if this even came up, was that one of the big disagreements that he had, one of the reasons he and Chris Greer don't get along at all, is that Brian was in favor of bringing Deshaun Watson in. And the owner was as well. Chris Greer wasn't. And that was a lot of the back and forth that created some kind of animus between them.
I'm not going to get into conversations and stuff that I wasn't a part of, but what I'll say is that Chris Greer has been the general manager of a losing team, the only winning team when Brian was there, but a losing team for 20 years. You don't become or remain 20 years a general manager of a losing organization unless you do what the owner wants when the owner wants it. So, creating some impression or some thought that Steven and Brian were aligned and Chris Greer. No, it's Steve and Chris, and
Brian.
Yeah, I mean, there's
What
a reason
about
he's there 20 years.
The notion that you guys also put out that in 2019, Steve Ross wanted Brian to accidentally bump into an unknown player, which I believe is Tom Brady, at a marina or on a yacht or something like that, to convince him, hey.
Yeah. So there were.
Can we agree it's Tom Brady?
I cannot neither agree or deny.
I mean, I said yes.
I can neither agree nor deny.
It's
but,
Tom Brady.
Tom Brady. What I will say is that there was attempts to have him meet with this player, talk of, hey, let's meet, and even before this, he had refused and said, no, I won't do it. So when this happened, he pitched as a lunch, and he goes on a boat. Hey, guess who's stopping by? Guess who's and I'm paraphrasing. Right. These are not quotes. Guess who's stopping by? Brian is a serious guy. Ethics matter to him. Brian does not break the rules. And that's part of the reason why he is such an amazing plaintiff in this. Not just the fact that he's a winning coach and effectively he got, I don't even want to say what happened to him, but, he's an honest guy. And honest enough to walk off a boat when the owner's there because you don't want to engage in tampering.
Right. Did he ever consider resigning from the Dolphins based on these things happening?
There's a lot that goes into that. When you help build an organization, and first of all, you move a family with 3 kids.
Right.
So let's not lose that. You bring coaches who have a job. It could be any form of coach. You're dealing with people in an organization where they get their check on you and what you do. You brought these people here. You bond with the team. You feel responsible. You're there for these players in a way that they know and they love you. So it's just not that simple to resign. And he loves to coach.
Sure.
Mike,
he's the best at it.
Let me ask you this. Are you guys now actively trying to recruit other minority candidates who feel as if they were treated in a similar manner, went through a sham interview, were lied to, didn't get opportunities, to embolden the class action part of the case?
I wouldn't use the word recruit only because it's not something that we're going to have to do or even something that, would necessarily be appropriate for us to do. I mean, what we have is an influx of people who are reaching out to us, who have stories that will be added to this complaint, individuals who will be added to this complaint. I mean, this lawsuit is going to expand. There's just no question about that. And it's not going to be the result of I think it's important from a legal perspective to just understand the image that people have of a lawyer going and recruiting people. That's not what we do. We're representing someone right now who was wronged. Other people have recognized that, and other people have been reaching out to us.
But today, the class action part of it is Brian and John Doe, assuming there's going to be more, correct?
Well, right now, so if you want to get into the nitty gritty, which I won't do too deeply.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you bring a class action, you only need one representative. And the class itself is going to be, in our view,
Popular.
certified regardless of how many named plaintiffs we have in this case. If we can prove our case that there's systemic discrimination in the ranks of coach hiring, GM hiring, coordinator hiring, et cetera, then we will be able to prove to a court that it would be appropriate to treat this as a class. Once that happens, notices go out to all of the people, all the candidates who were subjected to a failure to hire, et cetera, other types of things.
So to me, this is the NFL's worst nightmare because it's obvious that there's a discrepancy in hiring minorities for specific jobs, both front office jobs with the acknowledgement. I know that 2 minority men did get hired as general managers here in the last week and a half in the NFL, in Minnesota and in Chicago. But also there's 1 out of 32 jobs that is currently filled by a minority candidate, and he's been there for 2 decades, in Mike Tomlin. So, like, I'm a believer the NFL has hubris to a point, and then they write a check. It's what they do.
But you got
right?
to get to the next step because
Like, what's the end goal?
So let me tell you the end goal in a second. But you know what happens commonly in these things when you discuss it matter of factly or you break it down from one and you just look specifically at one case or this case, or you try to find a way to rationalize it. A lot of people do it because you want to believe this is not happening. You want to believe people are inherently good. No, this can't possibly be. So we try to find ways to rationalize it. But the reality is the numbers speak for themselves.
Right.
And we say, oh, yeah, there's 2 guys here. And I mean, the numbers are ridiculous. There's not one qualified man, one qualified black man to be a head coach in the NFL. You got to be kidding me, especially when you're pulling, who are a lot of coaches, former players.
Yep.
You're pulling from a pool of 70% minority
So how do
players.
how do we fix this?
We
then?
need
'Cause the Rooney Rule
so
hasn't
the
worked.
Rooney
We all
Rule-
agree.
The Rooney Rule is an idealist type
Right,
thing,
right,
right?
right.
You're assuming you're going to change people's hearts and minds when you just get that person before. But the reality is there's backroom dealings. People want to hire those who look like them, who they're comfortable with, who they view as the face of their
But so
franchise.
what do we do? Because
What we
you
have to
can't
do
force
is
guys
hire
to
more
sell.
minority
Not just that.
coordinators
Listen,
first.
coordinators, you have to tie, unfortunately, to right this wrong, you have to put policies in place, which is what we're fighting for, that can actually bring about change. Tie certain things to hiring.
Incentives?
And you can do increased cap space if you give a minority candidate a chance. There's a lot of different things that can be. You can even down to funding an organization that trains, provides opportunities, does certain things. I mean, there's a lot of things, and we're developing the non-monetary changes that we're going to try to enact.
Let me ask you this. At any point, did the New York Giants call Brian Flores after the interview to let him know that they had decided on Daboll and to thank him for his time or something along those lines?
He got a call, I think, right before they announced on Friday after the Fraser interview.
Who called him?
I don't know if it was the GM or Mara. I think it might have been the GM.
Saying, hey, just wanted to give you a heads
it
up.
was a quick, we're going to go with Daboll. And
Peace out.
Yeah.
Huh. That fascinates me. So, and he has not spoken to Belichick since the Texans.
No.
Not that it would matter, but
And
Has
again,
he?
this is not. Brian dislikes. Brian has a lot of respect for Belichick.
Well, he worked with him, yeah.
Yes, but this is the fact of the matter is, just as Brian believes this is bigger than him, it's bigger than Bill too. And Bill uncovered this. This is something in the text message that is proof positive that this is going on.
Right.
So you got to use it.
If Bill doesn't send that accidental text message,
Then
this
guess
isn't
what?
happening right now?
No, it's not. It's always been
No,
happening.
No, we know
But-
that's happening. But I
but-
mean, Brian saying, "Hey,
You know what? You know what happens? It's the same thing that happens to every minority candidate when they don't get a job. They go back with reputational damage. They go back questioning, why aren't I good enough? Why did I miss out? All while it's been rigged against them. So that humiliation, you got to go look at your kids in the face and say, yeah, Dad didn't get the job.
I disagree with that.
How can you
It's
disagree
not
with it?
always, not getting a job does not always come with humiliation. The fact in this case it does.
It's not just
because
this case.
He
This
knew
is-
it was a BS interview.
Yeah, but it's bigger than that, Craig. It's bigger than that. You can't just say that, okay, in this situation it happened, but there are people who go for these interviews, whether it's because of the Rooney Rule, and they're not given the time of day or serious consideration.
I think he mentioned he's been on 9 head coaching interviews throughout his career. We've heard about the Denver one, how insulting that was, the Giant one, he got the Dolphin one. Did he feel like most of those interviews were shams?
You know what? I haven't. The only interviews that I'm aware of is obviously the Giant one. The 2 that are still outstanding,
which is the Saints and Texans.
But here's Saints and Texans, and
he knows Casarios. He's got to know him personally for a while.
Casario was in New England,
right? Yeah, so he has to know Nick for sure.
Yeah,
but
he
wouldn't.
does.
I mean, bottom line is he probably wouldn't have known the Giants one was a sham had he not gotten Belichick's text. I mean,
correct. That's the point.
Right.
They would just be humiliated and think that they would be able to take cover under the. We just decided to go a different way.
Right. Now, let me ask this: is the suit against the Giants and Broncos separate than the class action suit against the NFL, or are they intertwined and can't be separated?
No, they can. So he's bringing individual claims
against the Giants, the Broncos,
and the Dolphins.
And
those are examples, but also freestanding independent claims of the widespread problem.
Now, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just so I have this. I understand the claim against the Giants and the Broncos. They're kind of the same. The lawsuit that names the Dolphins, that's about what? Defamation of character?
Well, there's part of it is going to ultimately be because of that. But also, again, discrimination. You've brought a black coach into a job that you've now put in a position where you're telling him he's got to lose.
But you're allowed to fire people.
So an article just came down. I'm looking at it on my phone now where Mickey Loomis is quoted as saying, Brian Flores informed us of a lawsuit after a very impressive Tuesday interview. So,
okay. Got it. So let me just finish that thought. Like, I can fire an employee.
Correct.
Right? And pay him like he is getting paid for 2 more years. So you're allowed to do that without, you haven't broken a law in doing that.
Well, a couple of things. One, you break the law when you fire someone for a reason that's explicitly unlawful because of, like, for instance, because of someone's race. And so to the extent...
And let me ask you, do you think that they fired him because he's black?
I think that absolutely played a role in it. And because if you look at the way that they treated him...
But does the color of the skin of the GM matter in this? Because Chris Greer is black, or is that irrelevant?
No, that's a hiding place. That's
another
hiding.
I'm asking the question.
Listen, not in a lawsuit, and not, and that's another hiding place.
I don't know. I think that's the weakest part of everything I've heard today.
The weakest part.
Yeah,
in what respect to what?
They didn't fire Brian Flores because he's black.
The way that they viewed him as someone because he was not willing to say yes and be a yes man, then a tank and a tamper.
Yeah. That's why I think they fired him.
Well, understood. Yeah. But there's a perception in America and a lot of corporate jobs and a lot of NFL jobs that you bring in someone who is black, they should be happy to have a job and they should follow the directives of the ownership. And at the end of the day, when he doesn't do that, that is a different way in which he'd be treated than someone who is white. Craig, let's look at.
I think you guys are dead in the water on that one.
No, and let me tell you why we're not.
Yeah,
let me tell you why we're not. Because you look at Coach Flores, and we know reality, right? We can play games and say this didn't happen, but a lot of times there aren't bridge coaches where you bring in a black candidate for a year, tank, we're not going to do anything, and then you fire him. Let's look at Brian. Let's look at Hugh Jackson in Cleveland. Let's look at Wilkes in Arizona.
No, I think David Culley's a great example.
David Culley.
1 year.
So,
no, absolutely.
So okay, we're going to hire a black coach. We're going to tell him to tank, or we're going to not give him the support he needs. He's going to lose for a year or two, and then he's out the door.
But then he won.
And then he won, and he screwed up what the plan was. So,
but the plan was 2 years earlier.
He didn't get fired because he's black.
But let me ask you a question.
Sorry.
But then talk to me about how Brian Flores, David Culley, Coach Wilkes,
Culley's a much
Hugh Jackson,
better story to sell me on.
But how? Because the only thing
Culley
that's
was a bridge coach. Everyone knew it when he got the job.
So how can you make the claim that that's not what they intended Brian Flores to be? They fired him after he wouldn't do illegal things, he wouldn't tamper, and he didn't tank. So what makes Brian? The only thing that you can argue is that Brian's not a bridge coach. Why? Because he stayed there 3 years. Why? Because Brian's
they gave him a 5-year contract.
No, because Brian. It doesn't matter.
But you're allowed to fire people.
You're allowed to fire people, but you're not allowed to set them up and not give them real consideration. So let me ask you a question. Do you think, and this is as a fan, not as an attorney, do you think Brian Flores goes in there in 2 years, loses for 2 years, okay, and then They get the number 1 pick. They
Right.
get Joe Burrow or whatever, whoever they
Sure.
want. Who's coming in? Jim Harbaugh now to
I
go win
don't
3
know,
Super
but
Bowls?
he didn't get fired.
Well,
But
let me-
it's
let me
speculative.
try-
Like, you're right, that could have
but-
happened, but it didn't.
But at some point, we have to look at the numbers and
Right.
what actually happens. So what your only argument is Brian Flores is too good a coach
Yes.
and won for 3 years. When, you ever see the movie Major League?
Yes.
That's what they
We
put him in.
cited that
And
yesterday,
Brian
yeah.
Flores is too good a coach, so that's why the situation, the termination has nothing to do with his race. But there's evidence throughout the league that when you look at, and I just named 4 in the last 3 seconds, Wilkes, Jackson, and Cully.
yeah.
And there's not that many black coaches, so let's talk about what the percentages of that, where these guys come in, they lose.
That the initial intention was for Brian Flores to be there for a year or
may
two,
have been.
lose games, tank, get him
It
out.
may have been. And when
Right.
you put the entire picture together and don't say, come on, this is not really happening.
How do you prove? Like, I get what you're saying, but how do you prove that?
here's
You're
how you-
proving
here's-
what you think the
well,
Dolphins' intent
Here's
was.
how you prove it.
Yeah.
And this is what, just to reframe it a little bit. When we're in discovery in this case, we're going to take discovery of not just the way that Mr. Flores was treated, but the way in which people who are white coaches were treated under similar circumstances. White coaches who did not say yes to everything that their owners asked them to do. White coaches that were supposedly not collaborative. White coaches that were supposedly abrasive or couldn't get along with all the right people. And white coaches, by the way, that went and won above and beyond what anyone expected them to do. And what we expect to see is that, and we know from the data, is that those white coaches under those circumstances don't get fired the way that black coaches do.
Absolutely
White
not.
coaches have a longer tenure than black coaches on average. In the last 10 years, 10 black coaches have been hired by the NFL, and not a single one of them remains employed, as opposed to at least 25% of the white coaches over that time period. So you're going to look not just, you can look at the Flores situation on its own and in a vacuum, and you could say, you know what, it wasn't race, it was this or that or the other thing. But the way that you prove a legal claim isn't looking at only the facts that you have in front of you. It's a comparative process, and you have to look at the way that a white coach that's abrasive is not going to get himself fired
Arenas
after
hit
going
his player
10
in
and
the
6 and then
helmet.
9 and 7.
Look at Steve Wilkes and Cliff Kingsbury. Steve Wilkes comes in, he loses in Arizona, okay, with a GM who gets basically suspended, and he has no GM. He loses, fired. Cliff Kingsbury comes in, loses a year. Guess what? You get a second year. This is not coincidence. And there's more to
I
it.
mean, how many black coaches have been fired after a single year?
I can name 2, Steve Wilkes and David Cullen. That's all in the last 4
How many
years.
black coaches are there?
How many?
That's
Not a lot.
90% of the black coaches.
But
What are we
also, how
talking
many
about?
how many coaches, period, have
I
been
got
fired
one right
after?
now.
He didn't
How
get
many-
fired. He didn't get fired.
No.
because he's black.
Forget about Brian Flores. You
Sorry.
asked the question. I'm trying to
Yeah.
answer it too, just as
Yeah.
using my brain here to think. How many coaches, period, have been fired after 1 year in the last 5 years?
Not a lot.
The only 2 I can think of, and maybe I'm forgetting someone,
Are those
is
two?
Steve
I get it.
Wilkes and
Listen,
David
I'm with you
Cullen.
on that. And
So,
by the way,
Craig-
I agree. The hiring practices suck. They're obnoxious.
When you say suck, they're racist
They're
and
obnoxious.
discriminatory.
Yes,
Just say it. Just say it. I want to hear you say it.
agree.
Come
I
on.
agree.
They are discriminatory,
I
Craig.
agree. I agree
Thank you.
100%
Thank you. Thank you.
that it's a real problem.
Thank you.
I disagree with this latter argument. Now, let me just, before we let you guys go, this is what the Giants said. We are pleased and confident with the process that resulted in the hiring of Brian Daboll. We interviewed an impressive and diverse group of candidates. The fact of the matter is, Brian Flores was in the conversation to be our head coach until the 11th hour.
Yeah, of Monday night,
Of
3
Monday.
days before.
Yeah, they didn't say when, 11th hour of what day.
Ultimately, we hired the individual we felt was most qualified to be our next head
So
coach.
most qualified, not the head coach with 2 winning seasons and a possible coach of the year, but the coordinator. And again, this is not a knock on Coach Daboll. As I said, Brian thinks the world of him, and he roots for him. and
Daboll's in a bad spot on this one because he's done nothing wrong.
He is.
Yeah.
He is. And you know what? That's tough. But you know who's in a worse spot? Brian Flores.
Yeah, well, listen, but he's
So-
a trailblazer, and if things go the right way now, he becomes a major historical figure
Well, I also hope
for
he,
change.
I also hope he gets the Saints job.
I
Like,
hope he
why
gets the
not?
Saints job,
He's a
too.
good coach.
He's the best. I mean, you win with nothing.
You guys
And,
have any
know,
plans? Does Brian have any plans to show up at the Super Bowl or Super Bowl week? All the media's
No,
there. the
you know,
commissioner
listen,
don't say
Brian,
that.
Brian, as I said, is a serious guy. He's not in for spectacles or anything like that. He wants real change. He's going to do it in the formal process, in the ways that, you know, are effective, but not a show. He's not a showy guy.
I have to ask this question. If his bank records were checked, is there a $100,000 wire at any time that goes to his bank account from related?
Craig, don't even play
or
that
Stephen
way.
Ross?
This guy,
Not saying he wanted it, but I have to ask the
not.
question.
This guy is.
So he never was sent the money.
Oh, stop. Oh, stop.
He also didn't lose the games on purpose.
Stop.
They won their last two games that year.
Listen, there's a reason he was fired.
He might have
and
sent
it's
the money
'cause
back, but
unequivocally, no.
Money was never sent. No, he could have sent it back.
We are
but
not
it was
getting
never
into
sent
this.
to
We're
him.
going to left field, Craig. But we
Got
love
it.
you.
So related never said, "Hey, do you need an apartment in the city?" Nothing ever happened like
Listen,
that.
I think it's time for Jeff.
All right, before we let you go, what is, just so we know, the next step? Or do we wait now until you guys have more people involved and you file more paperwork?
We got assigned a judge. I'll let Mike get into it, and moving forward, we're getting more class members.
I know the court process can take a while. What would be the next or
Go ahead, Mike.
expected moment when you appear before a judge or something happens?
The first step in the court process will likely be some sort of response to this complaint or an amended complaint that adds additional individuals and additional facts and stories, et cetera, in which case we'll get a response to that complaint. After we get that response, the first court appearance is generally an initial conference where the judge will either discuss any potential motions. The NFL may try to get the case kicked, et cetera. We think they'd be without merit, having done an investigation before making that conclusion. And then the judge will set a schedule for discovery once all those issues are resolved.
And forgive me for asking this, because at the end of the day, it's none of my business, but I have to ask the question anyway. I know Brian Flores has done well for himself the last couple of years. I assume this is like a pro bono case where you guys are trying to represent the greater good here, or is Brian Flores actually engaging with you where he's writing a big check to be represented in this class action case?
We're really trying to take it to.
Well, I got to ask.
You got to ask?
You guys get, listen, it's not bad for your law firms to be involved with it either. And I understand that is part of the legal process. So it's how does that work for the class action?
Mr. Flores has written us no checks. And we don't get, look, if we make the change we want to make, there's no way to cut out a percentage of that change.
That's the win for you guys.
Exactly.
The win is the change for us.
Great.
There's no doubt about it.
Well, listen, I appreciate you guys coming by.
And there's a lot, by the way, that goes into taking down, and changing the NFL.
Listen, it ain't happening tomorrow. We all know that. And this case ain't getting settled in 6 months either. This has legs, and it's going to go for a bit.
Unless they do the right thing. Unless they come to the table instead of taking
the NFL, so
taking the road and denying like they did. They come to the table and they say, what kind of changes?
They deny it in one breath, but then they also realize they have an issue. Like, they know they have an issue.
They've admitted the issue, but then they say no merit without investigating. So, they need to do a quick about face. If not, then we litigate this thing to conclusion. That's what we're prepared to do. Both our firms are behind it. My firm and Mike's and Doug Wigdor is behind it.
Well, it's John Elefterakis and Mike Willemin. I appreciate you guys coming in.
Thank you, guys.
Brian ever wants to, retell the story and more, long form, we'd obviously always have an open door for him to do that. And I appreciate you guys coming in. Thank you for that.